Okay, so let's kind of start the second part of this, which is a discussion of a device which we now call Gynecam. Started off as a device, it's a bigger project now. And so let me kind of step through the various aspects of this. When we started 5 years ago talking to hospitals, and I told you already that so many challenges came my way, Tata Memorial turns out to be one of our strong hospital partners. And there's a crazy number of patients who come to South Bombay every single day. And there's a dynamic here, which is because it's the best cancer hospital in the country, people come from the entire country to get an opinion here. There's a Tata Memorial Center which has been created in Kolkata. That's the second Tata hospital. And in fact, if you look at the hospital, that's better run, better equipped, looks like a proper good hospital compared to South Bombay. And yet patients from Kolkata will fly to Mumbai to get an opinion from a specialist here. The patient load, if you walk into this hospital in Mumbai, it's crazy. It's very depressing because these are late stage disease patients. They're all in bad shape. They're roaming around with relatives, trying to get diagnosis and care. In fact, you can quickly find Tata Memorial by just driving past. There are people lining the footpath waiting for a turn to come into the hospital to get an appointment with a doctor. And because they're poor people, they're forced to stay on the footpath. Maybe an NGO will come and help them find food, offer them some money because they'll have other concerns in the city as well. On a Monday, patient loads are double because weekend people have been waiting. So most doctors privately tell me they just find it too difficult to come in and work on Monday. And so 5 years ago when we talked to the big shots, the bosses at Tata Memorial, challenge was how do you reduce the patient load? Or conversely, how do you more quickly process all the patients who are coming into Tata Memorial? Now that's almost like for an engineer, that's an assembly line kind of thought process. It's a very challenging thought process because the philosophy of Tata Memorial is anybody who comes in must be allowed in, and in fact, you can even get treatment for free, theoretically. So assembly line scheduling, all of that works if, for example, somebody is willing to pay for an appointment and all that. So when people are just flooding in and want a free service, and that to any time of day or night, it's hard to do assembly line kind of engineering. Because the philosophy is that they should not turn away anybody. So at some level, there's a contradiction between how a private hospital would run and how this hospital is running. We spent a lot of time asking ourselves, what could we do to deal with patient loads? And of course, patient loads are coming to various departments in this hospital. There's breast cancer, there's oral cancer, there's gynecology related cancers, and all kinds of specializations are there. In fact, the specializations are not by disease, but by body. So head and neck cancer, thoracic cancer, gynec related cancers, and so on. So that's the way they're broken up into departments. Of the departments, gynec oncology seemed to be the least efficiently run, and therefore they were most desperate for solutions. So for us at a top level, and this is not even at this point need, problem, solution, this is simply can you do something about this? It's such a bad situation, can you do something about it? This is more sympathy, more empathy than actual proper engineering problem statements being given to us. Can you do something about the kind of thing going on? And a large window of time is being spent trying to figure out what exactly is going on with this woman who is walking into the gynec oncology ward. That diagnosis part, of course, you know there's cancer, but what version of cancer, at which stage is this now, all of that is itself a challenge. So in some ways the question to us was, can you fast track the diagnosis of cervical cancer and more efficiently handle a lot of people? This thought, you should actually think of healthcare immediately around you. If you have gone to any hospital and you have seen a specialist in a hospital, you'll realize that specialists waste a huge amount of time dealing with trivial stuff. For example, a doctor is going to take your blood pressure, right? A doctor takes your blood pressure, but a nurse could have taken that blood pressure. In fact, if you're in an OPD, waiting for your turn, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, you're waiting for your turn. And only when you go inside and meet the doctor is when the doctor starts feeling your pulse and taking your blood pressure and so on. All the data capture is happening by the doctor. When you wasted a lot of time waiting outside, and a nurse could have done this. Do you agree? You would have all seen this happening around you. So it's a very inefficient way of processing people. The same thing was going on in here, and that too now we are talking about, remember, people coming into Tata Memorial because it's a late stage of a disease. People don't randomly walk into Tata Memorial and say, screen me for cancer of this kind or cancer of that kind. We are not going to do that, which fundamentally means people are coming in at a late stage of disease, which puts a lot of pressure on individual specialists to look at various aspects of this disease. So the surgeon must worry about at what progression this is. Okay, you need some imaging specialist to try to figure out where exactly the tumor is in your body and what's going on. Okay, you need a medical lab technician to take blood or tissue samples and then stare at it and then tell you what is exactly going wrong, and to what extent has the disease progressed at a micro level in terms of damage to cells. A lot of expertise is needed to deal with one patient at this point. When they asked us to deal with cancer, they didn't specifically ask us to deal with cervical cancer, but when you say gynec, this is the major cancer. You can have ovarian cancer as well, and so on. The number of deaths in India is actually extremely high, and I say approximately. Remember what I told you before, with malnutrition, whatever numbers we are keeping are all fudged. There is nobody who is honestly reporting numbers, and whatever it is a massive underestimate of what is actually happening. Okay. What we do know is we have a huge fraction of the world's cases of deaths. This is death. People are carrying the disease, and it's cancer. It's not like getting malaria or getting another infectious disease. When you get cancer, you can have cancer for 20 years. It's getting worse and worse and worse, and then finally you have no choice, but you have to leave your village and come here, which is what happens to these people on the footpath outside Tata Memorial. If it is at this later stage, your outcomes are very poor, and because we have a mentality where women in particular from villages, in that household, in that village, that woman is probably the least likely to get medical attention. The earning male is the one who is probably getting most money spent on him, because then the family must continue to earn. That's a mindset we have. Net result, the disease is ignored to the point where you must leave your house and now come all the way to Mumbai, because that's where the specialized, low cost, maybe even free treatment is possible. And of course, for most people it's too late, because you've let it reach such a late stage. We are seeing this kind of, the 100,000 kind of numbers of deaths, reported at least. Now, something about the disease itself, which you should understand before I tell you more of this story. The disease, if you look at it, this is caused by what's called the human papilloma virus. It's a viral infection which starts this. The way a virus works, you're probably aware, it infects a human cell and replicates itself. When any virus invades a human cell, chances are the human cell dies. Because remember, the way it works is DNA from the virus inserts itself into human DNA. And why is it doing that? That's the mechanism by which to hijack a human cell and make more copies of itself. It's leveraging the raw materials inside a human cell to make more copies of itself. So the first thing any viral infection will do is to try to get its DNA into your DNA in a particular cell. Now, when that happens, most cells will die. Most human cells will die. Once in a while, a human cell, and all human cells have an accelerator and a brake when it comes to growth. Cells are supposed to grow, replicate, and so on. And there's control over this whole process of growth and death. And once in a while, when viral DNA comes into a human cell and integrates itself, this control over the brake is lost. What does that mean? That means that that particular human cell which is now infected with the virus will start growing at a faster rate because there's no longer a brake. And if it keeps growing, you will finally see a tumor. That's what ultimately causes cancer. At least cancer through this particular infectious cause. So cancer is not just always inherited. We think of it as a genetic disease which is inherited, but its biology is such that a viral infection itself can trigger off uncontrolled growth of cells. And finally, many years later, it shows up as a huge tumor. Okay. What's relevant to us is because it's a viral infection, we know of antiviral drugs for other things. And in theory, the viral infection could have been killed. But remember the whole process here. It's a woman in a household who's ignoring what's going on with her health until it shows up at a level where it cannot be ignored anymore, which is a whole tumor. At which point her health is extremely poor and she must be dragged to a tertiary care center like Tata Memorial in a big city. And by the way, for that to happen, somebody has to accompany her. Who is that somebody? It's got to be somebody who not just can manage in a city, but can obviously do this fundraising, doing the other things that you have to do to keep them alive in the city, right? So it is a capable person who comes along as an attendant. So if a capable person has come along with this woman, who is in the village? In the house? Probably nobody. So all earning stops. Because the earner has also probably accompanied the woman to come here. So the reason I'm telling you that is understand that there's a bigger impact than just saying clinical disease. Understand there's a big impact on the family. There's already enough statistical data building that the moment somebody ends up having to leave a house, maybe you're mortgaging your house, maybe you're selling your house to come to a city. By the time you do that, the economic impact is so large, you're going below the poverty line. In fact, we already kind of know that not only are you going below the poverty line, it's keeping that family below the poverty line for one more generation. The kids of that family will continue below the poverty line because the parents have to now invest everything on healthcare, trying to keep one parent alive. That's the background to this. So the impact, understand, is huge. The impact of neglecting disease to the late stage is huge. From a hospital perspective, if you look at who solves this problem or who attempts to deal with a patient, a team must come together to deal with one patient. You need potentially a surgeon, and usually surgeons lead the teams. So with each disease group, so head and neck, thoracic, gynec, there's a lead surgeon who is controlling the whole process of what happens to a patient. They head the disease management group, as they call themselves. Okay? So there's a surgeon. But you don't only do surgery to remove a tumor. What else can you do to control a tumor? Chemotherapy. So there is a medical oncologist who has to worry about how to dose chemotherapy. You can't simply give chemotherapy like you're injecting anything else. You have to watch what the side effects are. And in fact, you have to change the doses over time. You can't give somebody a strong dose for months and months and months. You have to change. So somebody has to fine tune this. And somebody has to think about what to do and what not to do. So it's a very specialized activity. What else can you do? Cobalt radiation? Well, radiation. Cobalt or otherwise, radiation. So there's a radiation oncologist who plans how to hit a tumor with radiation. Why is it such a, why can't I just expose it like an X-ray? Why can't I just hit a tumor? Because you're about to use so much radiation trying to kill off cancerous cells that if you do it carelessly, you'll damage neighboring tissue and you'll take normal tissue and you'll end up making it cancerous. So it's a highly specialized task. In fact, it's a highly specialized engineering computational problem statement of how do I aim radiation, let's say coming out of a cobalt 60 machine, okay? That isotope is sitting in some chamber and it's literally like with a camera, you're opening a lid, boom, radiation goes and hits you, and you have to close the lid fast. And you have to aim that radiation such that it's aimed at the tumor. And by the way, your tumor size is changing with every visit. So one strategy which you create for how to aim radiation on day one will not work 1 week later because the tumor size has changed. And you have to worry about how to hit this radiation without causing damage elsewhere. For example, if I've got a head and neck tumor, I have to protect the retina from radiation. So I have to create a mask, a lead mask, so that radiation doesn't hit the eyes. And I have to make sure I'm aiming it down. So if my jaws are gone, if I've got a tumor on my jaws, so I'm aiming it in such a fashion with the eyes shielded. All of that is a very tricky task. And maybe I can't hit you with one dose of radiation. I'll have to hit you from multiple sides with small doses so that the side effects are minimal in the whole surrounding region. That's a mathematical problem. How to, in a constrained fashion, how to hit you with enough radiation to kill the tumor without causing damage to peripheral areas. Point of which is that this guy has got to be extremely expert if he's going to use radiation to kill the tumor without harming you. With more problems. At this point, we talked about therapy, right? So, surgeon, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. But what about the diagnostics? What about the MRIs and the CT scans? You need specialists for that. Right? Your nursing support is not your standard nursing support. You need specialized, okay, nurses who know how to handle palliative care, how to get you to recover after what is very harsh treatment. You cut away tumors, that's a nasty thing to do to the body. It's harmful. So now you need a lot of care afterwards. Point being, a lot of effort goes into keeping one person alive, and already things are rather too late for most people. So outcomes are very poor statistically if you look at what happens. How do you prevent this? How would I prevent this?
Early diagnosis.
Early diagnosis. So you don't wait for the problem to grow this bad. Need finding. What did Tata Memorial ask us to do? Get them to function more efficiently in your hospitals. Not reduce the patient burden, but make the patients pass through the system more efficiently. Okay? Reduce the residence time, if you want to call it that. Reduce the residence time that the patients spend in the hospital. Okay? Is that the right need statement? It's a good thing to do. If you can achieve it, it's a good thing to do. Is that the right need statement? The hospital wants us to efficiently pass more patients through their setup. The same challenge came to me from a multi-specialty premium hospital in the city called Seven Hills. They also want more patients to come through the setup. Their objective is different. They want to increase their profit. So if more patients can quickly be processed, better. Asian Heart Hospital asked us the same thing. After a bypass surgery, patients lie in bed for a week, sometimes recovering. They don't want to rush going home early in case a problem develops. So people are nervous. After a major surgery, people are very nervous. Understandably. But if they're lying in bed, at this point, the hospital is being treated as a hotel at some level. That bed cannot be used for another patient who needs a bypass. And a week goes. Now, that can be a technology challenge, which is if I can find a way to monitor you at home, I can free up the bed. In fact, I can earn more. No? I'm freeing up the bed and therefore more surgeries are being done. But I'm also charging you because I'm offering you some monitoring at home. And now if I can find a way to monitor you 24/7, great. I can more efficiently process people. So assembly line thinking in hospitals. So the question now is, which aspect of cancer care must you work on? What is the need statement? Early detection. Why detection? Why not a better therapy?
Because if it is a initial stage, then therapy is simple and cost is also less.
Okay,
But at later stage,
it becomes expensive.
it is expensive and more risk,
Okay.
time consuming.
So when you talk of healthcare, this is what a complete healthcare system ought to be in any country. So look at that list. We talked about malaria, right? Is there any government agency which can tell me which pockets of India are likely to get malaria this monsoon? The answer is no. Why? Because we have not systematically gone out and surveyed where malaria is happening. So assessment. Okay. If data were gathered systematically, you could predict where problems would arise. If I can predict where problems will arise, what will I do about it? For example, I will fumigate more in those areas. I can proactively do something to prevent it from happening. But to do something, I don't have infinite money. I have limited amount of money. So to be efficient about it, I should be using some information available to me. If I don't have that information, I should generate that information. I should assess where the problem is, so that I can deal with it. So that's at one level. So we don't even have a systematic data capture happening for the most part. Things are only getting worse. For example, with malaria, now people are starting to move across the country. A couple of years back, there was a large outbreak of malaria in Rajasthan, and it was connected to people from Orissa based on the strain of the parasite they were carrying. So what happened? When canals were being built in Rajasthan, laborers were brought from Orissa. They brought all of the parasite with them. And suddenly you have an outbreak of malaria of a form never seen before in Rajasthan. And not, by the way, malaria is not a uniform kind of disease. There are versions of malaria, variants of malaria, and the treatment protocols can change depending on which parasite has infected you. So all of this, if you have data, you systematically collect data. And in Western countries, systematically there's an effort to collect data. What it does is it finally keeps the cost of healthcare low because there's planning in advance to deal with an outbreak of some kind. Next level is prevention. We have a success story with the polio vaccine. If you could prevent a disease from happening in the first place, nothing like it. We spend a lot of time talking about killing mosquitoes and preventing malaria. If we can prevent it, ultimately cost will be low. Okay? We have talked about diagnosis, and when I asked you what could be done, your first instinct was to say diagnosis. Intervention is where most Indians get healthcare. When I say intervention in a hospital. For most Indians, the first access to healthcare is an emergency room in a major hospital. For most Indians. We are not the type to randomly walk in and get a physical done on a yearly basis. Okay? In the West, insurance companies insist that every year you go get a physical evaluation done. Why? Because they are trying to keep you healthy. Why? Because by keeping you healthy, they will spend less money on your health care. So they don't even talk of health care, they talk of wellness. It is in their interest to keep you healthy and well. Okay. Whereas we wait till the last minute, that's why it's intervention. I talked about recovery. Okay. Are you allowed to sit in a hospital and recover just like that? In government hospitals, probably no, you're thrown out very quickly because the beds are needed. And recovery, rehabilitation and so on are all things you worry about by yourself with your relatives looking after you. Right? If you have ever accompanied a relative into a hospital room, you'll realize that even watching to see whether that drip is coming to an end, you have to sit and do it. There's no nurse who's trying to keep track of whether you're running out of a drip solution from your IV. So it's a model where relatives have to run around doing all of this. You have to buy medicines. The hospital will even make you run around and purchase those medicines and come back rather than dealing with it internally. So it's a model where, except for intervention, healthcare in India has not progressed in any of the other six. The three before, the three after. We deal with healthcare If you think of healthcare, our idea of healthcare, our doctor's idea of healthcare is to set up a new hospital. Okay. Once upon a time, it was possible to get a doctor to come on campus and visit you at home. Here, not anymore. You have to go to where the doctor is. Why? Because it's more efficient for the doctor. He'll see more patients and not waste time traveling. So that's a business model. And it's a business model which has forced us into we don't want to spend, and the specialists prefer to stay in one spot. Net result, all that expertise is in hospitals, and that's the background to what I'm talking about. So now I'll come back and ask you again, where should we intervene? Which of this now should we intervene for cervical cancer? Which of these levels?
You have to act on all the.
Right now we are at the intervention level. Where should we intervene? Anything before intervention is obviously going to be some value addition, especially to the woman who's going to potentially get the disease. Prevention. There is a vaccine out there for HPV.
I read somewhere that there are certain blood tests also which do the early detection of something.
So testing protocols, we'll discuss that. Testing protocols are there. But more importantly, before testing, prevention and assessment. Right? If I can vaccinate you.
No, not vaccination, but that test tells you in very early stage.
Yes, but you know, I can go around and ask people in the country whether they've got, using a test, I can ask whether they have cervical cancer or not, or even that HPV infection or not. But an easier and cheaper thing to do is to just vaccinate everybody. I don't care whether you have the disease or not, I just vaccinate you. It's far easier to do. Think about it. You don't have to take your samples to a pathology lab and all that. Just like we dealt with polio. Did we ever do a diagnosis for whether somebody is likely to have polio or not? We didn't care. We just vaccinated the whole population. That turned out to be cheaper. Once and for all, we got rid of it. And also with polio, one of the things that happened is, when I started going past 60%, 70% coverage of the population, the spread of polio itself went down.
But
because the transmission goes down, and therefore,
can be of different type.
cancer can be, so right now I'm talking about cervical cancer, which is an infectious disease. So if I control the spread of infection by vaccinating half the population, even that will have a huge impact. Because my end effect is, I'll bring it down by 75%, not 50%. I vaccinate half the population, the impact is more than half. Because spread of disease is going down. Fair? So, and it turns out vaccines exist. Populations abroad are routinely vaccinated. Incidence in the West of cervical cancer is going down. Why is it not used in India? No? Vaccination is going to be, from an economics perspective, all said and done, it will always be cheaper for a government to once and for all invest in this, as opposed to setting up more cancer hospitals and dealing with the large numbers of patients later on. It will always be cheaper. So there's a fair amount of politics. So a large amount of the spread of cervical cancer has to do with sexual activity. And now people get nervous. If you vaccinate people and they don't get this disease, will they become more sexually active? And it's a cultural argument being used to avoid vaccinating whole populations, at least in the interior parts of the country. So the net result, women go without this, the vaccine, and there's a real struggle politically to deploy vaccine. So it's used in Delhi and a couple of other states, but many states will not even discuss this, even though there is data that proves that it works. So in India, therefore, if prevention cannot so easily be done for whatever reason, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, not my place to say it's right or wrong, but it's not happening. So if we cannot prevent it, the next best thing you can do here is diagnose it. Okay? If you are trying to prevent the disease from escalating. That is not a long-term solution. The long-term solution is once and for all kill off the disease by a vaccination campaign. That will happen 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when politicians change and the bureaucrats in control of this change. Okay. Before I get into our solution, what other innovations do we see in healthcare? If you broadly look at it, innovations can happen in the diagnostics area, and what's currently happening is people are building gadgets of various kinds, including wearable gadgets. You think of a Fitbit. Onto Fitbit, can you collect additional measurements? Can I collect your pulse rate? Can I collect your body temperature? Right? So all of these things are opportunities. The moment you put on a gadget, you can start collecting vital signs measurements And there's even fancy versions of these coming out. Why do I have to put an armband? Can I have jewelry? Can I have a earring which is also measuring your temperature? So, and you'll see this, a generation of products come out which are fashion statements, but also collecting data of some kind. At an extreme level, we have also started sequencing human genomes and saying you are likely to have this mutation that might cause this disease, so you might want to proactively do something about it. That's happening, but that's obviously a very expensive thing to do. So the average Indian is not going to benefit from that. That's a top of the pyramid kind of solution, genetic testing. What's increasingly also being looked at from an Indian innovation perspective is, can you come up with processes and services? Why? Because we've got so many. So you know that anything you want, you can get couriered home. You want something, vegetables bought, person will deliver it home. So if you have got that kind of labor, there'll be people willing to come home and do some sophisticated thing for you. For example, in Mumbai already, you want kidney dialysis done, you don't have to go to a clinic. You rent a dialyzer, kidney dialyzer, which is a membrane, but it's not just a membrane. Now you need water, you need pure water, filtered water, reverse osmosis systems, because you're finally injecting yourself with water, a buffer, or a buffer to which sugar has been added, and you're dialyzing out your salts. So the point is, for my convenience, can I avoid having to travel, to commute? Look at the weather today. If somebody has to go to a dialysis center today, it's not fun. So can I flip it? Can somebody come home and do that service for me? Answer is yes. When market starting. So anything where a human service can come home.
Bags are
Sorry?
bags are also there.
That's a different kind of dialysis. Peritoneal dialysis, that's a different dialysis. You're looking at, you've gone to the Tata Center lab, you've already heard about 3D printers and so on. You've got to understand that it's possible to 3D print tissue. I want a new organ, I want a new kidney. It will be possible to generate a soup of cells, or your own kidney cells, which will be cultured in a bioreactor. And from there, you will 3D print a whole organ. It's getting there. Similar technology to what you're saying. Here we are 3D printing plastic. There is no reason why the same logic cannot be extended to 3D printing tissue. And guess which company is working on it? Many companies are working on it. Which big company is working on it? Google. Of all things, Google. Because these digital technologies will kick off in a big way, and Google's not falling behind on them. In India, we're mostly working on taking known drugs and finding new uses for them. So that's what I call repurposed drugs. And we are looking at generics drug manufacture, trying to drive down the costing of drugs manufacturing. Why? Because then you can pass it on to the patient. So can you give that chemotherapy at a lower price point, which it is. In fact, plenty of people come in from abroad to India because drugs are cheaper in India than compared to the US, for example. And our latest innovation is one of, can we have entire health cities that you can think of? Actually, it's Dubai which leads here, but we are already looking at pockets in India, for example, Manipal and Mangalore, that stretch. Can you have a concentration of hospitals where people come in maybe for tourism. People come in to see the temples around Udupi, but then you also get your bypass done. And there are plenty of people in the Gulf who would pay to get high quality medical care at a subsidized rate. So we're looking at such business models, right? In fact, Narayana Hrudayalaya has started innovating in this. The latest hospital, one of the latest hospitals they set up is in the Caribbean, of all places. You know of Narayana Hrudayalaya? They do the cardiac care, bypass process. The only thing they do is heart care. It's a single specialty hospital, nothing else. Okay, what is the business model? That's an assembly line business model, one specialty. So keep pushing patients in an assembly line fashion through the surgical theater. Okay, and they have gotten so efficient that the surgeon only does the bypassing of a stretch of artery. Everything else is done by nurses and all that. Opening up is done by a junior doctor or whatever. The surgeon never spends his time on stuff. That way, at a very high throughput, a lot of people are pushed through. And because they focus only on one disease, there's a reduction in cost of every consumable. The plastics used, the needles used, the scalpels used, all the steel, surgical steel, all of it is bought in bulk And all of that benefit of buying things in bulk is passed on to the patient, who gets therefore a bypass done at a fraction of the cost than if you go to any other multi-specialty hospital. Assembly line. So all the logic of why a car is manufactured cheaply in assembly line mode holds for hospitals. And they've taken this logic and now they've gone to the Caribbean. Why Caribbean? Again, that American visitor who comes to the West Indies for a holiday, then you get your bypass done and you go back. You try to do this at your own cost in the US, you'll pay 5 times that amount for surgery. So it's a business model. So they are sitting just outside, if you think about it, just outside the US water boundary. With cervical cancer, why should we solve cervical cancer? Why should an engineering team solve cervical cancer? So this is a challenge. So when it came to us, the initial thing was solve this as a problem, or I shouldn't say solve it, at least attempt to solve it as a problem, and systematically understand what it takes. What is weird about this is a bunch of engineers finally running a healthcare solution. It should have been doctors running this, it should have been other stakeholders running this. So here's my need statement. We kept talking about need statement. So look at this need statement. The need statement is, I notice the precision in what I'm looking for. I'm not simply saying I need early stage diagnosis. When I asked you what should we be doing, you said early detection. What else is there in my statement which is extra? I'm not saying just early detection. What am I saying? Treatment. You don't detect people and leave them alone. Why should I walk into your house and tell you that I've got a particular disease and then I go away? I just ruined your peace of mind, right? I can't be simply diagnosing you. I have no business doing that. As a diagnostics company, maybe I'll become rich, but ethically it's entirely wrong. So you have to treat people. What else? What else is there in my statement? So why is that important that we have written primary and secondary care?
So that patient need not to carry.
Right, it's early detection. So there's nobody who's going to walk into Tata Memorial for early detection. Yes, so these are people who are not even suspecting a problem, right? So I've got to ensure that therefore this is done at their convenience wherever they are at. So it's not enough for me to build a solution. If that solution was designed for use in Tata Memorial, then the right kind of person is not coming to Tata Memorial for this. It's only the late stage patients who are coming to Tata Memorial. So I have to design this so it works in a public health center. What's the difference in a public health center and Tata Memorial? What's the difference in expertise level between doctor in Tata Memorial and the paramedic in a small health center? You have seen small health centers around you. What's the difference in the expertise level? When you're building a technology, who are you now building this technology for? You understand? So the engineering challenge totally changes. If I'm building a gadget for a surgeon at Tata Memorial to diagnose, that surgeons are a highly competent person. If I'm designing this for a nurse sitting in a village, what does it take for me to design this so that it works in foolproof fashion for a nurse in a village? So this precision of what you're thinking about ultimately matters. Okay. The next thing you do is look at all the available technologies. You don't jump into building a solution. We were guilty yet again. I told you about blood type problems. Even here, we built the wrong solutions first. What's the gold standard solution? In the West, they do something called a pap smear. In the pap smear, you take a piece of tissue from the cervix, put it on a glass slide. You might have seen pathology glass slides. And then a pathologist stares at this tissue using a high-end microscope, and you'll see stuff like this. Of course, the tissue has been colorized using some dyes. And based on the precise patterning of the stain, you diagnose. The pathologist has been trained by seeing thousands of these images. They know what they're looking at, so they diagnose what they see. That's the way it currently works. Okay, that's a pap smear. That's the gold standard. So in the US, a surgeon would trust a pap smear. What's the challenge in India? What do you think is the problem with this in India?
The technician is able to understand this.
Which technician? It's a pathologist, it's not a technician.
Sorry, pathologist.
Okay.
Pathologist.
Yeah. But in the US also it's a pathologist in some lab. In India also it's a pathologist in a lab. What's the difference?
No, maybe we don't know that.
We have enough patients. In fact, doctors from all over the world now medical students from all over the world come to, in fact, Tata Memorial itself would be right now having at least 10 clinicians from England or the US, from Harvard even, learning in India. Why? Because we have such patient numbers coming through. They will see cases which will otherwise take them years to find in the US. So if you want training, come to India.
Whether they are.
So it's ironic. Our doctors try to go abroad for training. Their doctors are coming to India. Because in a few months they will see the kinds of diseases and very quickly learn which they cannot do on their own. Yeah.
Means whether they are able to make the slides and then.
So let's assume it's done. Let's assume it's done well. What is the bottleneck?
Image.
No, I didn't even talk about image processing. This is just manual. Somebody is looking at it under the microscope and diagnosing. The bottleneck is we don't in the country have enough pathologists to deal with the whole population. Okay. A surgeon who is going to decide next what to do depends on a pathologist's report. It's that report which tells you whether there's a tumor there potentially or not. So what the surgeon does next is a strong function of the opinion of the pathologist. If you think about this, and you might have seen this with in your own case with some of your relatives, what a surgeon does is usually he refers you to a particular pathologist, not any random pathologist. You're all usually referred to a skilled pathologist. What is the challenge here? A skilled pathologist. That means most pathologists are not actually properly trained. And because it's a life and death matter, you see a model where the surgeon trusts only a particular pathologist, right? So you have to understand that background to this. The moment you say that, therefore, this is in the hands of expert pathologists, how many expert pathologists might the country have? At this point, it's in the thousands. Thousands, whole country. Expert pathologists. Of course, many pathologists, degrees being given out, but expert pathologists. There's a reason why people come from Kolkata to Parel in Mumbai and do their diagnostics all over again here. Because you want the best possible skill looking at this if you can afford it. Right? So, if there are 1,000 pathologists, what's the population size? It's a scary number now. Right? So, we don't have enough competent pathologists. So, even if we were to now, for the sake of argument, if I have to go into every village and screen women, if I were to screen women and I were to use the pap smear to screen the entire female population in India, we don't have the pathologists to cope with this. Forget the money. Whether we have the money is irrelevant. We don't even have the expertise to cope with this. That's the first observation. So, early detection using the pap smear is not, the way it is currently done, it's not feasible. It costs, by the way, approximately $2,000 to get a pap smear done, and you're primarily paying for the skill of the pathologist. The rest of it is cheap in terms of glass and so on, stains and the chemistry of it. The other way to do this is to test for the presence of the virus. We said it's a viral infection. If I test for the virus, maybe I get a diagnosis. The catch is that viral, so this will be like something like a pregnancy kit. The cost of that kit is anywhere between 500 rupees to 2,000, depending again on whether it's been subsidized. What's the problem with this? If a screening solution costs $2,000 per woman to detect whether she has an infection, and she may not have the infection, right? You don't know in advance whether she has the infection or not. You have to screen. So if I walk into a village, I have to screen every woman. If I have to screen a population at $2,000 per woman, there isn't enough money in the country, in the healthcare system, to screen, and this is just cervical cancer. And there's oral cancer, breast cancer, all the other cancers. So moral of the story, this is a viable diagnostic solution. Technology-wise, this works. In fact, it's accurate. In fact, it's even better than the pap smear. Why? Because this tells me of the existence of a virus. So even before the virus potentially damages my tissue, I can say that I'm infected with the virus. And let's immediately kill the infection before it escalates into a disease itself. What a group of hospitals, including Tata Memorial, have been saying for a while is because we cannot afford the 2,000 rupees per woman, the only way this works is if you train nurses into spotting lesions on the cervix. That's called visual inspection, VI. And visual inspection can either happen by using acetic acid as a stain, and this is kind of like the Band-Aid thing. When you peel off a band-aid, you see how the skin color changes around a wound, right? Fundamentally, if you apply some kind of a chemical to a wound, the color, you'll see a different color to the wound compared to the normal tissue. And that's a simple trick that people have known for a while. So in this case, they use acetic acid, and when you coat tissue with acetic acid, if there's some damage to the tissue, it will show up as white. It will be whiter than the surrounding tissue. The other thing you can do is coat it with Lugol's, what's called Lugol's iodine basically. And if you coat it with iodine, again you'll see an infected region show up slightly differently. So the trick here is use acetic acid or iodine as a stain of some kind, as a dye of some kind. And you can see with your naked eye, you can start seeing, that's why visual inspection, you can start seeing a problem. This is Tata Memorial saying this. So what is their solution? Teach nurses how to spot discoloration of tissue. And by the way, both acetic acid, which is vinegar, and iodine, you will find anywhere. You'll find it in any village as well, in a small hospital. So it's a low-tech jugaad kind of solution. The catch is, whatever you're seeing with your naked eye is a large enough size now for it to be seen by the naked eye. So it's not individual cells that I'm seeing. It's not a virus that I'm seeing, which basically means the disease has evolved to the point where it's a visible damage to tissue. Not so great, so it's not very, very early detection. It's a little later into the process. But even there, if you can spot it. The other thing that they say is, if you spot the lesion, you can, in theory, hit that tissue, which is potentially infected, and kill it. So you can, for example, use what's called an electrocoagulator, which just coagulates the cells, the tissue, and burns it literally, and kills off the infection. You're killing the human cells, but you're also killing the virus in it, and thereby you're reducing the impact of the virus. So that the logic is deal with it on the spot. So when we looked at this was the only thing viable from an Indian perspective. So notice we are not saying that this is the best thing to do. The best thing is the pap smear, the best thing is the HPV test, but it's not affordable. And what exists as visual inspection, actually the problem now is that it's a strong function of who's looking at it. And some experiments were done some time back, and the same patient is shown to multiple gynecs, and the gynecs don't agree with what they're seeing. Half of them saying that there's a disease, other half saying there's no disease. So there's a problem. What is that problem? An individual's perception of what is a problem is variable. Now there's a technology opportunity. If individuals don't agree with what they're seeing, can you come up with an imaging solution and calibrate that imaging solution to potentially be more accurate than an individual human expert? And that's the nature now of what we are about to talk about. You then look at...
If you make the images of slide and stand it to the expert through some mail or that.
So I'll explain that at the end. That also can be done. I'm not looking at the slide. I'm just imaging the cervix directly. Okay. At this point, you look at the gadgets. The ones which are on the left are all gadgets which are already in hospitals. So a Tata Memorial is likely to have this. The Tata Memorial is likely to have this. These are not portable devices. Do you see yourself taking this into a small village? It's got to be some portable digital solution. Okay. These are portable digital solutions. This one's in fact based on a smartphone, and what you're doing is you're using the optics of a smartphone to acquire an image for the cervix, and then from there you're trying to see whether there's a lesion. This is from Sweden. This is no longer in business. This is on the market. It costs 3 lakhs. And there's a problem. Would you give a nurse, and by the way, when you say nurse, they're not always formal nurses, they're ASHA workers, they're midwives, ANMs. Would you give an ANM a gadget which costs 3 lakhs? So in an Indian context, who is it who's going to do that? And the answer is no. So it has to be an order of magnitude at least lower in price to get a technology out there. So at this point, a competing technology exists. The technology serves a purpose. It does the job, but it's too expensive. And you have to bring the cost down an order of magnitude, and that's a challenge for us. So this became an early version of our solution. If you walk into the lab, Tata Center lab, the prototypes are sitting out there. So next time you're there, you can hopefully play around with these things and look at it. What we did was we came up with a dedicated system. If you look at the previous solution, this is based on a smartphone. The smartphone was being handled in whatever trials had gone on, it was being handled by experts, by gynecologists. In India, you're not going to find a gynecologist who's going to go into a village and screen them. Again, patients have to come to the gynecologist in a tertiary care center. So who will screen? It's a nurse. It's that ASHA worker, a midwife. What does a midwife know about biology? Nothing. What does a midwife understand about disease? Next to nothing. Most midwives in our country are high school dropouts with negligible education. Now, the reason that's, so other than the cost of it, the reason that's dangerous is, remember, this is an infectious disease. If a nurse goes and uses this device on one patient and then goes and uses it on the second patient, what can happen? This itself can be the spread of infection. So there's a potential risk here. So if you use a phone, and by the way, I don't know if you know this, most phones are horribly infected with all kinds of things. If you give your phone to a microbiologist and ask them to figure out what's growing on your phone, you'll be surprised. The last thing you want growing on your phone is the HPV virus, because that will be the spread of contamination. So we said that whatever it is, finally has to be encased in something which can be wiped down with alcohol. Can't be a phone, because you're not going to put alcohol over your phone. Right? You want some capability. You want Zoom. It turns out you need a tripod because the nurse can't be holding the phone and trying to capture an image while holding the patient and so on. You can't be juggling this. So you need a tripod capability and so on. We looked at, so in other words, we systematically identified the specifications needed. It needed battery support for 8 hours. In a village, who knows when you'll get power? Right? So must have battery so that at least during a screening camp, 8 hours non-stop, you can screen people. You should be able to capture data in an SD card, because it's not a question like a phone. I can't capture an image and WhatsApp it to anybody immediately. So you store data locally and then you send it later on. So here's how it would look like if you looked at a fist, the whole kit on the right with a tripod. Here's what a cervix looks like. On the left is acetic acid, and you might barely make out a whitish stretch over here. It's hard to detect. This is an actual case of cervical cancer detected with our device. On the right is iodine, and it's obviously way more obvious if you're looking at it with iodine. Okay, for the same patient. What happens next in a project like this? So at this point, I have a potential technology. Do you see the casing? Do you see the casing here? Is it like an iPhone? It's not at all like an iPhone. Do you see the cracks in the casing? Right? Why are there cracks in the casing? This was all 3D printed and so on. So it's a very crude prototype. I am not spending money trying to come up with a very polished, finished looking device. Why? I first need to figure out whether this solution is even useful or not. And I should not be spending my money trying to come up with a very professional looking solution till I know that this has potential use. Once I know this works, then it's in my interest to make it crack free, use the best, cheapest components that I can. You can actually make out that this is in fact an industrial display system with buttons, not even meant for this particular purpose. It's meant for an entirely different purpose. So like almost like Jugaad, we have stuck different components together. We put in a Raspberry Pi in there. You'll hopefully play around with Raspberry Pis or Arduino cards in the lab. We used existing hardware without worrying about cost of the prototype, and we simply put it together. Why? Because you have to ask the question, will this technology in this form factor potentially be useful at all? If the answer is yes, then you'll spend more money trying to clean up your design. If the answer is no, then why are you wasting time on this? Try out something else. Okay? So the immediate next thing in terms of thought process is get an opinion as to how good your solution is. How would you do this? I can't sit in here and pretend that I've got a solution for cervical cancer. I've got to send it to where people are likely to use it. And you can see the map. We actually found places all over the map. Why am I not sending it to one hospital? Because if I send it to one hospital, that one hospital may have a very weird idea of how the technology will be used. So I want to get opinions from 20 different locations, literally 20 different locations on the map, and understand what are the ways, different ways in which they might handle this technology. What are the features they want? Are they all satisfied with it, or do they want other things? Okay, we learnt a lot. The high-end hospitals, they were very unhappy with the product because they all expected to get something very polished like an iPhone surface. So a little disappointed that a case had cracks and so on. They're very, external appearance, in terms of external appearances, they're very conscious about whether it looks good or not. And in hindsight, if you've seen a surgeon, they don't want to carry broken devices. They want polished, professional-looking devices. They didn't care whether I made it for 30,000 or 3 lakhs. In fact, I made it for 30,000. That was a target price point, remember? 3 lakhs, order of magnitude, one order of magnitude down 30,000. Right? They wanted a professional looking solution. The nurse, any place where I pushed it into an interior location, what did the nurse think of it? Nurses are perfectly happy. And they used it very proficiently at what they were supposed to do. And from their perspective, remember, nobody had ever given them a gadget. So they're not complaining whether I gave them this gadget or the 3 lakh gadget. They got a gadget. They got a toy. They're very happy to use it. In fact, they used it very systematically as per our guidelines of how to use it. Okay. So, two different consumers. Urban gynec wants a professional device. Rural paramedic midwife, perfectly happy with what we gave them. Okay. How do you prove that what you're doing is useful? You actually have to do a systematic study of this. What is that systematic study? And it took us a while to think through and figure out what is that experiment which will convince everybody that this is useful. That systematic, so what is the current way things are being done? A gynec evaluates a patient, which of course doesn't happen because the patient is not coming to the gynec, that's a different matter. But it's the gynec whose opinion is trusted. And the gynec is physically inspecting, maybe prescribes an HPV test or whatever it is, or a pap smear. The gynec is the one who's trusted. What are we proposing to do? Why are we creating a gadget? Because we are saying this gadget can be handled by a nurse in a village. And what is the logic here? A gynec will never go to a village. So if the screening has to happen in a public health center in terms of primary or secondary care, who is that person who's available to you to screen? If there are no doctors, it's got to be some midwife, some nurse, some ASHA worker. These are the only people you can trust to screen. I'm not asking, will they do it? That's another challenge. Why should they do it? How do you pay them for doing it? These are all challenges. But the only resource you might have to screen, if this has to be early detection in a village, is an ASHA worker. And so remember, my technology now must work in the ASHA worker's hands. Right? In which case, what does the study have to do? I have to get the nurse or a midwife, get her to use the device, get her to collect images. Can I allow the nurse to diagnose by herself? That's a little dangerous. This is an illiterate person who has not studied the basics of medicine. To get the nurse to suggest a diagnosis is asking for trouble, because then she might do something next. She might try to deal with the lesion and fix it, and in doing so she may harm the woman, the patient. So you can't expect the nurse to arrive at a diagnosis. The Indian mentality is the doctor will finally write and sign off on a diagnosis. So what must happen therefore? The nurse must collect the images of the cervix using the gynecam and must relate to a gynecologist, and because the gynec will not come to the village, the data must go to the gynec. And you must get the gynec to give an opinion. And in my study, to see whether this is a useful way of doing things, I have to benchmark that opinion against a local gynec. Now I have to pay a gynec to go there, because gynecs don't normally go into villages. So actually recruit. When I say recruit, I just paid some gynec for their time to go in and participate in a screening camp. Okay? So there is one expert on the ground who's coming up with the diagnosis. That expert is not seeing the data I'm getting through my device. The data I'm getting through my device, I'm feeding to a second gynecologist. And what am I comparing? Are the two diagnoses the same? Whether it is positive or negative. If the two diagnoses are same, what does it mean? It finally means that a task which is currently handled only by an expert gynec can now be started by a nurse. Which means I'm achieving a shift of a task from somebody who is an expert to somebody who is now a untrained person. That's a big thing. Why? Because I've got way more untrained nurses I can access than I can access gynecs. Right? I've shifted a task, it's called a task shift. I've shifted a task from an expert to a gynec. When that kidney dialysis technician comes home, you have shifted a task from a nephrologist to a kidney technician, dialysis technician. That's a big thing, because there's large numbers of people out there who can become dialysis technicians. Only a fraction of them will become nephrologists. So if you're looking at scaling, you have to scale with the right kind of manpower to deploy your solution. So if I'm paying attention to who's deploying my solution, and I validate that there is no drop in the quality of what is happening, but I'll get just as good a diagnosis by using this untrained paramedic, then I've got a business model. Potentially, I've got a business model. If it turns out that what's going on with my nurse is inferior to what a gynec is doing, then I have a problem. Because how do I justify diagnosing women in villages using a nurse who's wrong half the time? Because there's life and death stuff. And I have no business doing this with a poor quality human resource.
So what is the proportion of detection?
We have not done anything large enough to actually figure out. The incidence of cervical cancer is something like anywhere between 2%.
After doing 100.
Yeah, so it comes down to the incidence. The incidence itself is 2% of the population. So you can't be, if I screen 100 people, it means nothing. I'll only find 2 cases. Right? So you really should be screening in the thousands. Now, that's the other thing. When I did this, and I did this study, what are you expecting to compare? A positive diagnosed this way should be a positive also diagnosed this way. And we just said 2 out of 100 people might have this. So for me to be statistically confident about what's going on, I should screen thousands of people. If I find 10 people with a disease, what do I do next? I did a screen. I found 10 people. In doing so, I confirm that my technology is good. Good for me. But what do I do? What do I do with the 10 people who are positive? Wait a minute. I'm the one who pulled them into this study, into this experiment, and I figured out they had a disease. It turns out the ethics of this says that it is for you to now fix their problem. So I had to pay for their treatment costs. Okay, and the logic is fundamentally that if I had not done the screening, maybe yes, they had the disease, but they were leading a peaceful life. When I now do the screen, and by the way, when I screen, I have to tell them what is happening to them. I told them that they have a disease, and I can't leave them alone. I can't say you have a disease and walk away. Right? There's a cost. So this study costs quite a bit, because you actually have to worry not just about the cost of diagnosis, which is cheap. I'm using a camera effectively. But the cost of treatment is expensive. So the study involved a cost which we did not budget for originally. But a realization which quickly happens is, if I execute this study, why is this study important? Because I go back to a whole collection of gynecs. I go to the gynecologic conference which happens. And then I tell a bunch of people, look, you have been dealing with this disease all along, but you don't need to deal with it yourself. You can offload this task onto nurses and midwives, and you'll get just as good an outcome. If I have to convince the experts to hand off a task to somebody else, I have to do this in some kind of a research mode and convince them that there is no drop in quality which will happen, for which purpose I have to do a large scale study and get the community to, okay, they have to, as an engineer, I can't go and tell the medical community how to behave. Okay, so I have to show them evidence that things function well. So that field trial study, in this case it's a clinical trial, but that field trial study of any technology is critical, because you're going to convince people to change behavior and do something. That evidence has to be generated that this is indeed, with the new technology, that this is indeed a better way of doing things. Now, as we did this, another problem. What does the nurse know about cervical cancer? Nothing. In fact, the nurse knows nothing about cancer in the first place. This is again a high school dropout. You want them to use technology, you have to educate them. So the thing suddenly we had to do was to actually create an entire syllabus for how a nurse or a midwife would potentially walk into a village, convince a woman in a household to come forward for screening. Why should a woman randomly come forward for screening? So it takes some convincing. So You needed some explanations of what the disease was about, what might happen to them. Will you step forward, come on screen? And so that entire syllabus. Then, how do you set up your instrumentation? How do you set up the various instruments? You saw the iodine, this, that. How do you set all of that up? Okay, you've got to maintain some sterility with what you're doing, even inside a village household. So this became a curriculum of sorts which we created. We created animations, we created small videos, we put them on phones and tablets, and we gave them to 25 nurses and ASHA workers who went about in Pune and Sholapur districts. And we gauged to see whether they understood what and retained these concepts of what they were learning. So now suddenly notice, as an engineer, I'm no longer talking engineering education, I'm educating nurses. Why is this important again? If the nurses don't understand what's going on, why should they use your technology? And worse, what if they use your technology the wrong way? So an investment in education pays off. And one way to think about it is, I created a market. The nurses were not ready to do anything before. They were not trained to do anything before. With this little training that I gave them, they were now in a position to use my gadget, which creates a market where there's no market before. That's an important thought. So you can't simply say, I build a gadget and now there's people out there who can use my technology. The people aren't there. The training isn't there. The education levels aren't there. So you have to focus on figuring out whether you need to upgrade people into handling your technology. So just some screenshots from what we created. Small apps. Okay. These things, by the way, when we went looking, and it's a total surprise to us, even Tata Memorial, all its teaching is done using PowerPoint slides, where the characters were getting cancer, in this case cervical cancer. They're all whites, Caucasians. We've been using artwork from abroad. And so obviously if I try to show some foreigner getting cervical cancer in a village in Maharashtra, people don't connect, people don't relate. So what was critical was for us to create local artwork of women, of characters getting this disease, and then dressed like them, behaving like them, talking like them, and then they connect. And if you want somebody to come forward for screening, I can't give a lecture in English and convince somebody to come forward for screening. I have to speak the local language. Now that's a problem. What's the local language? So many languages. How many languages in the country? How many dialects in the country? That's even more important, because every few kilometers the dialect changes. So convincing people in their local language to come forward is a hard challenge. Okay. Something we have played around with is a business model. Remember I told you the urban doctors wanted a fancy device. They were willing to pay as long as they were made to look good. So rather than the original thing, notice we came up with a case and it does the same thing. This costs slightly more than 30,000. It does absolutely the same thing as the previous model. What's the difference? Any doctor who's already used an iPhone and wants to take a photo, he says, I want to pinch and zoom and all that stuff. He's used the camera app on a phone. Now when I give him something with buttons, physical buttons, he doesn't like it. So he insists that I want a interface which looks like an iPhone. So we gave him an interface which looks like an iPhone. Okay. The business model is this. If somebody is willing to buy, and these surgeons and so on, they are, by the way, directors of hospitals. They are directors of clinics. They are not the ones who will actually be going out and screening women in the villages. But as directors of hospitals, they will influence the purchase decision and they will prevent a low-cost solution being bought by the hospital and given to nurses. So they become bottlenecks. And until I give the director of hospital what he wants, he will not buy the low-cost device. So the trick was make a high-cost device, which is entirely the same thing in terms of functionality. It's like iPhone, JioPhone. At the end of the day, if the only thing you want to make is a phone call, you're actually better off buying a JioPhone. But the people will want the iPhone, right? So if somebody wants the iPhone, and this is a dynamic where they want for themselves an iPhone, but for everybody in their company, they'll give them a JioPhone. So give them the iPhone so that they will then go and sell the JioPhone to everybody else. So this is a pro version simply because we want to market the basic version. When you want a social impact solution to reach the market, Notice the barriers here, and this is not simply about technology. Somebody wants a premium version, somebody wants a basic version. The nurse doesn't care whether it's a premium version or not. But the only way the nurse will end up with a gadget is if I satisfy the doctor first. Because he'll prevent the nurse from getting any technology down the road. These are business, this is actually called the Robin Hood model. Steal from the rich and give to the poor. So you're taking away money from the doctor so that you can actually subsidize copies going to nurses. Okay. Now, other challenges follow. If I was simply making the high cost version, there's any number of companies. We actually had a multinational come to us and say, we want to license this. So we asked them, where are you going to go screen? They said, in Dubai. So our entire social impact story is gone. We meant to screen in a village and they want to go to Dubai with us. Now, it's very tempting. On the one hand, you'll make the profits that you need to cross-subsidize this. But there's no social impact angle at all with what they're doing. Right? Even worse, if you want to make something at the bottom of the pyramid with very little profit, if the intent is to have social impact, then I cannot say that I made something for 20,000, 30,000 rupees, and then I hike up the price to 1 lakh. That defeats the purpose. If you want social impact, you price your product very low. Now, who's going to manufacture this? I created a prototype solution in my lab. I don't want to be sitting and making copies of this in my lab because it's a waste of my time, resources, space, and so on. Right? So the ideal thing for me to do is to license it to somebody. That's a hard thing to do. Why? Because you're trying to license to somebody and you're telling them, look, both of us will not profit, okay? You make it, we'll sell it at a low price point, there'll be lots of social impact. Why should the manufacturer make it if he's not getting a profit? Why should somebody license it from me if they're not getting a profit? So in this segment, it turns out manufacturing is a hard thing to do. Not because the technology of manufacturing is not available, not because the infrastructure for manufacturing is not available. The set of people, GE, Philips, Siemens, they all want cervical cancer solutions. But they all want to sell at the multi-lakh price point. Nobody wants to sell a gadget at 30,000. Right? Do you see this? So what is the manufacturing strategy? And it turns out the only way to do this is to get a local manufacturer, some local manufacturer, and you say, look, I'll work with you. You simply sit and do the manufacturing. Okay, and we'll, to the extent we can, we'll subsidize you. I'll get money through the government. I'll give it to you. And you set up your manufacturing plant for this, and you do it. So in other words, a subsidy model is the only way this works. Otherwise, if the manufacturer has to set up a plant for this at his own cost, why should they do it? When, for example, they know that you can also sell in Dubai, right? And sell highly expensive versions in Dubai. So where's that incentive for people? So it turns out that all of these are challenges which one by one. And so finding a set of people who will work with us and pull solutions and sell at a low cost is a challenge. What next? A major project is underway along with Tata Trust and potentially with university collaborators from abroad, from the Northeast. In the Northeast. Why Northeast? The state of cervical cancer screening in the Northeast is horrible. And for that matter, treatment. The Tatas, for example, have decided to put up 3 cancer hospitals in Assam, 2 in Guwahati, 1 in Silchar. And at this point, one of the things, and we were in parallel working on this, the Tatas plan, just like they put up a hospital here and 1 in Kolkata, now they're going around various states and putting up a hospital here and there, 1 in Varanasi, 1 in Ranchi, 1 has come up in Visakhapatnam. And their logic is, we know how to put up hospitals, so we'll go around the country putting up hospitals. Which is good, because there are not enough good hospitals. So that investment by the Tatas is good. They're spending ultimately, by the way, 1,000 crores on putting up these hospitals. This is money which, by the way, the government should have been spending. Shouldn't have been a company putting up hospitals for subsidized cancer care around the country. What is the catch with this line of thought? Putting up hospitals in the country. How many hospitals can you put up? How many cancer hospitals do you think exist in the country? Just give me a number, rough number. How many do you think exist? Are we talking tens, hundreds, thousands, what is it? 10. You're going with 10. Okay? 10, everybody?
In each state.
10 in each state. Wait a
No,
minute.
no, no, one in each.
One in each state. No, there's more than one in each state. They're in the hundreds? Below? Below 100. Actually, many states have regional cancer centers. Several of them, in fact. And between public and private hospitals, we have order of 200 cancer hospitals, more like 300, but 200 recognized ones. 200 cancer care centers for a population, again, always do that calculation. It's a stunning contrast between hospitals, the number of doctors, number of pathologists versus the population that we have. By the time we flatten out in terms of a population, we are almost at 1.5 billion. Right? So the question is, if I put up 3 more hospitals in Assam, what does it solve? Again, we are back to late stage treatment.
But that is far off the state, so
That's okay.
those who are traveling to this,
Yes, but that's not automatic. Kolkata, which is better connected, and people still come from Kolkata here. People get an opinion at TMC Kolkata and still then fly to Parel. So you put up in Assam, people might still prefer to come to Mumbai
actually
or
people
go to
want
Vellore.
the best treatment.
Yes, and it's understandable, right? So it's life and death for people. So you want the best opinion, right? I'll come to that in a moment if you want the best opinion. But currently, so therefore, if I put up hospitals in Assam, what's it guaranteed to solve? Yes, for those who cannot go anywhere else, this is your local solution. But you're going to see a dynamic. Will the best specialists in the country go to Assam and work out of there? No. That's historically been a problem. It's not that money hasn't existed, but talent has left the Northeast to come here. In fact, the best students, as I keep seeing, in fact, in the pathology department at Tata Memorial here right now, are from Assam. The toppers. After training here, will they go back? I've asked them this. And the answer is no. They'll be absorbed anywhere in the world. Right? So there's a problem. So even if you put up the hospitals, maybe you'll not get talent, and you're back to square one because people will not trust the local talent and will want to come here. But more importantly, putting up hospitals is not the same as early detection, and we already discussed that, right? So if I put up a few more hospitals, how does it bring down the entire crowd of people who need care? And this, as we said, ought to be money spent on early detection, not money spent on more hospitals and doctors. Because you cannot scale the hospitals and doctors to deal with a population our size. And we did some calculations on this at a recent workshop we had. You look at a population our size, this is a disease which hits women into their middle age. Most of our population is young right now. Most of our population is young right now. 20, 30 years from now, most of our population is old. So if you look at the number of cervical cancer cases, it's going to go exponentially. And the rate at which you're building hospitals is linear. So the two are not going to meet. So if this problem is to be solved by simply building more hospitals, not going to happen. So it has to be dealt with before people come to an hospital. It's as simple as that. From a government's perspective, from an economics perspective, it's simple, straightforward. Do you invest money available to you for healthcare in building hospitals, or do you invest it in prevention, awareness, early detection? Whatever limited money you have, you spend it on those, not on hospitals. And you leave the hospital sector to itself. Of course, the government will subsidize some of the government hospitals, but the private sector will also take care of this. Right? So, in a nutshell, one of the reasons we are partnering in the Northeast is because we are arguing that early detection must start happening in a big way, and that's on two fronts. One is technology must be used. The other is people must be trained to handle the technology, and they want us as essentially a partner to help achieve this over there. So, the people we find in an early detection sense will feed into the hospitals. So the hospital should start addressing cases where the disease is happening early, not late stage. So I want you to appreciate that this thought process is now happening well after the gadget is built. As you start asking, how will the gadget be used? And our realization is, because nobody is stepping forward for screening, Even if I say this technology can be handled by a nurse, there's nobody who's going to pay the nurse to go out and screen. Who will ultimately pay nurses to go out and screen? It's either a government in some state, or else it is some entity like Tata Trust which are setting up hospitals. The community health department in a hospital will actually send out staff to go and screen. They'll run screening camps. So these are the two entities who will do this. So how does your technology help them scale and impact better? So what are the things we'll learn? We'll understand what it means to do a field trial in an entire district. It's one thing for me to say I screened 500 women with my technology. It means nothing, 500 women. We really don't understand how technology would have an impact if I screen with such a small sample size. So your rollout must become larger and larger, and now we are saying what happens in an entire district. In fact, the Tatas agree. The only way out long term is what is a way to screen an entire district? What is the cost of screening a district? And if you know this as a blueprint of sorts, you can go from district to district, you can go from state government to state government, and you can tell them this is the cost for you to screen for cancer. And hopefully other state governments will join in. So right now it's Assam. Assam has offered its local government hospitals to be converted into cancer care hospitals. That's why they're being chosen. Right? And even in Assam, we quickly realize Assam doesn't have the bandwidth to cope with the number of patients we will find. So now TMC Kolkata is going to partner us as well, because patients will have to be sent to Bengal to cater to such large patient numbers. What else? Many of these places where I walk in and screen, I will not have the money to send my nurse a second time. Then what is the point of screening if I cannot fix the problem? So if you reason this backwards, the only way to do this is screen and fix the problem at one shot, in one trip. So what is the treatment? So back to figuring out how do I treat this using that electrocoagulation system if I detect early stage. If it's already late stage, then nothing to be done. I have to drag that woman to a district level hospital at least to follow up. Okay. Machine learning. Up till now, we are acquiring all these images and we are relaying it to a gynec. The problem is the gynec's training is incomplete. So the gynec continues to make mistakes. So how to remove the human element entirely? And now there's actually while on the face of it, machine learning is far more accurate, there's actually a subtle problem, which is, remember, my gynecam is with who? With the midwife. Supposing I put machine learning on top of the imaging solution, and it's a one pot, so immediately on the spot I get a diagnosis. What has happened? I've taken an illiterate woman, and she is now capable of automating and generating a diagnosis. What might she try next to do? She might attempt to treat on her own without relaying this diagnosis to a doctor, without getting an opinion from a doctor. It's as if she is being treated like a doctor. In fact, the woman in the house will not know the difference. The woman in the house will think of her as a doctor. And you have a problem. When you give somebody too sophisticated a technology, if this nurse thinks she's a doctor, that technology could backfire. Because the first time the nurse does something bad and hurts a woman in the process, what will be blamed as a technology? Because the nurse will say, I didn't know the diagnosis came, machine learning gave this diagnosis. The way machine learning is being used abroad is it's in the hands of experts. And the expert will have enough understanding to say, I trust the machine learning opinion, maybe the opinion is wrong. The expert will have the ability to override, but the nurse will never override my decision. That means the challenge for me is to make sure my technology is foolproof, that I don't make wrong decisions. That's a much higher threshold that my technology will have to pass because it's in the hands of somebody who's not that skilled and has the risk of being abused. So we need to, that part we understood only when we went out and we realized that there's a risk here that the technology will backfire if it's used the wrong way. In all of this, we are assuming that nurses will simply walk into houses and do this. But why should they do it? Asha workers are already overworked in most villages. And as it is, the government doesn't push their payment on time for whatever it is they are currently doing. So why should they do this? So what are incentives for them? Right? If I push this data from an Asha worker to a gynec who's sitting in a village, why should sitting in a city, why should the gynec in a city spend time looking at samples of images coming from a village? The gynec makes more money looking at a patient across the table. I can charge more for a live patient than for an image coming in. So what's a business model here? Amazingly, Hinduja Hospital here in Mumbai, which is a multi-specialty hospital, there are images coming from the US of American patients, and local doctors are diagnosing and sending a report back. Our doctors are doing it because they're being paid in dollars. So it's profitable for them to do that. How do I get a doctor sitting in Mumbai to look at an image coming from Assam? Because you won't be paid in dollars. You'll be paid in a few paise per image. Business models. So it cannot be done with expert doctors. So who will look at an image here? Maybe a medical student, if I cannot afford to get a doctor. Right? So the whole incentive must happen in terms of business models.
Some server can be employed for image processing.
The hardware is not the challenge. Finally, a doctor has to write a report and sign off on it.
That nurse will send the image and that server will process it.
No, but that's the same as machine learning, automating a machine learning. A doctor, it's like a pathology report. Even if a machine has come up with a readout from a blood sample, finally a human pathologist actually signs off on that report. How did we fund this? And that's critical for you. Understand that all of it started with a very small grant. For 2 years, we worked with 12 lakhs trying to build the first proof of concept. That first proof of concept, and I showed you that gadget, I showed you that crude prototype with cracks in it. That first proof of concept was built for 12 lakhs. What happens is, with that prototype, we're able to then go to other people and say, look, I think this is an idea which works. And you might want to invest more money in it. At this point, we went and asked CSR foundations to give us more money. If I have to make 20 copies and give it away, I need money. If I have to do a clinical trial and deal with patient costs, I need money. If I need to re-engineer the device, I need money. And the team keeps growing. Initially, it was build a gadget. Then it was, can we do machine learning? Okay, then can we do field trials for which you need doctors or somebody with some medical training? Right? The skill sets that you need, the team grows larger and larger. You're almost like at some point behaving like you're a company inside my lab. There's a team behaving as if it's a company inside my lab. So constantly we were pushed into getting more additional funding. And at some point, the really big experiment, the Northeast experiment, no donor will give you that much money. So now you need somebody like a Tata Trust to run a whole district trial. That's crores of stuff. And we don't want to be, this all said and done is a government setup. For me to process money will take forever. My accounts department, as it is, asks me, why am I buying so many copies of a component? Right? So you have all these problems with execution. The team which has worked on this has kept changing over time. The core members, there were some team leaders who have remained constant with this. In fact, some of them have left, but interestingly, they are continuing to work with us, even in their spare time, wherever they are at. One of them has jumped, the original team leader has jumped into the company which will license our technology, and so she's pulling it into her. Appreciate that the team, because this is a gynec problem, the team had to be led by a female engineer. Because the engineer had to walk into a gynec clinic and talk to gynecs and understand how the technology will be used and to see it being used on patients. Right? So that's a dynamic. Why is that important? Not too many women engineers around. So to have a very competent female engineer who could drive the team while talking to clinicians was also a challenge. The last element in here, you talk of skilling. We needed animators, we needed trainers, and they now go around training nurses. In fact, we're being called all over the country. Ironically, we're being called to train nurses all over the country. Okay, so some final messages on this. From day one to now, the problem definition has kept changing on us. Initially, we started off trying to build a low-cost pap smear system. Then we tried to build a low-cost HPV test. Then finally, we created the gynec. That was a third attempt at a solution. Okay. So what was important early on was for us to acknowledge that our initial attempts were wrong, so that we could quickly switch our resources, whatever remaining money we had, so we could spend it on what was a better solution. That's critical. To get locked into saying that the way I am doing it is right, probably means you're doomed. So you have to be open to criticism and to acknowledging that you may want to do it differently. We talked to many people, we talked to clinicians, we talked to nurses and so on, brought them on board right to the beginning, and they partnered with us. A gynec must see what I'm trying to build because she must visualize how it's going to be used by her later on. So right from day one, come in and understand the engineering of what's going on. Don't wait for me to build a prototype and give it to you. Come in early on. Once we realized that everything was going to fail without training nurses, couldn't at this point wait for somebody else to come and train us. We had to invest in it ourselves if we wanted our technology to succeed. So every aspect of the problem had to be addressed by one team, not by separate teams, which meant that you needed to pay attention to team composition. It happened by trial and error for us. We kept adding team members, but in hindsight now, we are faster and smarter about how we create a team upfront to tackle problems, because you can visualize that some problems will need, for example, skilling, will need, for example, some business experience and so on. Okay, having a team member who understood, we had a team member in our team who had already taken a product out. So he gave us a lot of wisdom on what it takes to commercialize the solution. And early on, having that made a difference. And last few things. This is actually a very difficult space for somebody to work in as a student. Why would a student work, and that too in IIT, right? So most of our students, graduates, have got all kinds of career options available to them. So why would you work on these kinds of problem statements? The girl who led the team was an MTech topper from IIT Bombay. In fact, dual degree, BTech MTech topper. She could have been placed anywhere. So she's at some level doing it from her own satisfaction perspective. The challenge in some ways for us is such people who can find so many job opportunities elsewhere. What do they gain by working on this? They hope to make a large impact on society. And so what they ask for us is, from us is, how do we provide them stability? How do we make sure that the project can last for 3-4 years? So they give it a good shot. And it's not like after 6 months the project is dead and we are firing them. How do you give them stability? So what it tells you is, if you find people, if you find talent in your colleges and you invest in them, meaning you push resources their way and you give them stability, good things will happen. In all of this, as a chemical engineer, my contribution was the least, because I was not involved in the actual fabrication of any device. My skill sets were not relevant. The team leaders, everyone who was part of this played a critical role. So their commitment to the project is important. So if somebody is doing it just because I'm paying them a salary, it's not going to work. Somebody must be doing it because they want to solve the problem. So how to find people in your colleges and to keep them as a team is critical. So that's a conversation we'll have on the last day when I see what you've done and potentially talk about how you might, leveraging TechWhip funds, try to do something on your own. So I'll stop here. Any questions on this? We can take it. I think we're well beyond time. Yeah, we're way beyond time, sorry. So.
Sir, what was the problem of that smear test slide taken by some local person and then transporting by courier?
So the turnaround time, so if a tissue sample is collected locally and sent elsewhere, the turnaround time is a month. Why should a pathologist in a city quickly look at a tissue sample coming from a village?
No, if suppose some model is agreed upon, then
yeah, so don't jump into machine learning just because machine learning is
not machine learning, but because that appears means you don't need much hardware part and local training.
Or you do. If I'm looking at a piece of tissue,
currently I'm not looking. There is a person who will collect the sample, and then it is processed at some centralized level.
Yeah, but that processing at a centralized place means couriering that sample from a village. There is no, the nearest centralized place is a major city.
District headquarters or
that competence is not there.
At district headquarters.
Yes. So even now, KM Hospital, which is one of the best government hospitals here,
or rather,
sends all its samples to Tata Memorial.
It is just my suggestion. Maybe it transferred to some district level, then they take the image and send the image to some.
Yeah, that taking that image part is what one of our Tata Center projects is. I have another project on telepathology. It is not so simple because which image will you take? Yeah, but which image? At what magnification?
Microscope.
Yes, but I'm not taking one photograph, right? So if this is my slide, then one photograph actually takes one tiny zone of cells and images it. So the real challenge is how to take 40,000 such images, and I have to move precisely and take 40,000 images. Then I have to computationally stitch it together.
Some gadget That
Wait a minute. So that's a scanner.
Yeah.
So we are scanning a slide. We are not
Yeah.
taking a photo of a slide.
Okay. Scanner.
It's a scanner.
Scanner development.
Yeah, we built it
Yeah.
at a 1000x magnification.
Okay.
When building a microscope cheap at
Yeah.
1000x is itself expensive. So here you're building a scanner.
Scanner.
So we built it. So maybe it's something we can showcase a little later. Okay, thank you.